The story begins 6 months earlier, in May of 1944, when Elsa Kohler first joined the Wehrmacht Women's Auxiliary Corps. She was 20 years old, a skilled radio technician from Nuremberg who believed she was serving her country's defense. The recruiting officer had painted a clear picture of the enemy. America was weak, the officer told the assembled young women. Their soldiers were poorly trained, their people were starving, and their country was collapsing under the weight of its own decadence. If captured, you will be treated brutally, the officer warned. The Americans show no mercy to women. They will starve you, humiliate you, perhaps worse. Remember this, and fight harder to avoid capture. Elsa had believed every word. Why wouldn't she? It came from official sources, from people she had been taught to trust. She carried these beliefs with her when she was stationed in northern France, operating radio equipment in a command bunker. She held on to them when Allied forces overran their position in early November, and she and 42 other women were taken prisoner. During the 3-week journey to America, those beliefs seemed confirmed. The food was minimal. The conditions were cramped. The Allied soldiers who guarded them were distant and cold. "This is exactly what they told us to expect," Rosa Zimmerman whispered to Elsa one night in the ship's hold. "They hate us. They will make us suffer." When they finally arrived at Camp Rosewood, a converted warehouse facility in rural Pennsylvania, Elsa's first impression reinforced her fears. The building was stark and industrial, surrounded by fences and guard towers. American soldiers watched them with unreadable expressions as they were processed and assigned to barracks. The women clung to each other, speaking in hushed German, trying to maintain some dignity in their defeat. They were given basic clothing to replace their tattered uniforms, simple gray dresses that marked them as prisoners. They were shown to their sleeping quarters, rows of cots in a large open room. Everything felt cold, impersonal, exactly what they had been prepared for. Then came the announcement that would begin to unravel everything. At 1800 hours, Staff Sergeant Martinez informed them through a translator, "You will report to the mess hall for dinner." The women exchanged glances. What kind of dinner would their captors provide? They remembered the warnings. They steeled themselves for humiliation, for the meager rations that would remind them of their defeated status. 19-year-old Clara Schmidt from Augsburg gripped Elsa's hand as they walked toward the mess hall. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we face it with dignity." Elsa nodded, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. They formed into lines as they had been instructed, 43 women preparing themselves for whatever cruelty awaited them on the other side of those doors. The mess hall doors swung open, and the first thing that hit them was the smell. Rich, savory aromas that seemed impossible in a world of rationing and scarcity. Elsa's stomach clenched involuntarily, responding to scents she hadn't experienced in months. The women filed in silently, their eyes adjusting to the bright lights overhead. Long tables were arranged in rows, each set with metal trays and utensils. American soldiers sat at some tables, eating and talking in relaxed voices. The casual atmosphere felt surreal to women who expected cold detention and harsh treatment. Staff Sergeant Frank Martinez stood behind a serving line, his dark eyes surveying the nervous German prisoners with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't exactly welcoming either. He was a stocky man in his 30s, his olive skin suggesting Mexican heritage, his kitchen whites spotless despite the dinner rush. "Begin the line," the translator called out in German. "You will each receive one meal." The women shuffled forward, uncertain and tense. Rosa reached the front first, holding out her tray with trembling hands. Martinez took a thick pork chop from a steaming pan and placed it on her tray. The meat was golden brown, clearly well cooked, bigger than any portion Rosa had seen in years. Then came a generous scoop of applesauce, its cinnamon scent rising in the steam. Sweet potatoes followed, glazed with butter that gleamed under the lights. A thick slice of bread, a pat of real butter, a cup of milk, white and fresh. Rosa stared at her tray as if it contained something forbidden. She moved aside mechanically, making room for the next woman. Elsa stepped forward, and Martinez repeated the process. The pork chop landed on her tray with a solid weight that felt almost obscene. Is this real? Elsa thought, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't prisoner food. This was better than what she had eaten as a free woman in Germany, even before the war's privations had really begun. One by one, the German women received the same generous portions. No one received less. No one was singled out for smaller rations or inferior food. The equality of it was almost as shocking as the abundance. They sat at assigned tables, the 43 women clustered together, staring at their meals in collective disbelief. No one lifted a fork. Clara looked at Elsa with wide eyes that held a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Why are they feeding us like this?" she whispered in German. "What do they want from us?" Elsa had no answer. The propaganda had prepared them for starvation rations, for cruelty, for reminders of their defeated status. It had not prepared them for pork chops and butter. It had not prepared them for food that smelled like comfort, like home, like the meals their mothers had cooked before the war consumed everything. "Is it poisoned?" someone whispered down the table. The question hung in the air like smoke. "Is it poisoned?" Several women looked toward the American soldiers sitting at nearby tables, eating the same food from the same serving line. If it was poisoned, the Americans were consuming it too, laughing and talking as they cut into their pork chops. Private Robert Clark, a young soldier with sandy hair and a boyish face, noticed the German women's hesitation. He caught Elsa's eye and made an exaggerated gesture of eating his own food, patting his stomach with satisfaction. He smiled, not mockingly, but with a kind of gentle encouragement. "See?" and his gesture seemed to say, "It's just food." Rosa was the first to give in to hunger. She lifted her fork with shaking hands and cut a small piece of pork chop. She brought it to her mouth slowly, as if expecting it to transform into something terrible at the last moment. But when she chewed, her eyes closed involuntarily. The meat was tender, seasoned with herbs she recognized, thyme and garlic. It was prepared with care, not just thrown together. It was delicious. She swallowed, and a small sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a sigh. The other women watched her, waiting to see if something terrible would happen. When Rosa took another bite, they began to eat as well. The meal progressed in near silence, broken only by the quiet sounds of forks against metal trays. Elsa cut into her sweet potato and found it soft, buttery, with a sweetness that seemed almost decadent. The applesauce was homemade, not the tasteless paste she remembered from military rations. The bread was fresh, still slightly warm, and when she spread butter on it, the butter actually melted. She hadn't tasted real butter in over a year. In Germany, they had been using substitutes for so long that she had almost forgotten what the real thing tasted like. The milk was cold and fresh, not the watered-down or powdered version she had grown accustomed to. Each element of the meal contradicted something she had been taught about America's supposed deprivation. Across the table, Gertrude Meyer ate with methodical precision, but tears ran silently down her cheeks. She was 25, the oldest among them, and had served as an administrative specialist in Mannheim. She had a husband somewhere, assuming he was still alive. She had seen her city bombed, had watched rations grow smaller month by month, had heard the official reports about America's weakness and impending collapse. Now she was eating better as a prisoner than she had as a free woman. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. 24-year-old Brigitte Werner, a signals operator from Regensburg, leaned toward Elsa and whispered in German, "They told us America was starving. They told us their soldiers were eating sawdust bread and dying of hunger." She looked down at her plate. "They lied to us." The first night in the barracks was restless. Elsa lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the evening meal over and over. Around her, she could hear the other women shifting in their beds, equally unable to sleep. The meal had disturbed something fundamental in their understanding of their situation. If the Americans had lied about the food, what else had been a lie? When morning came, it brought with it a new test of everything they thought they knew. At 0600 hours, they were instructed to report to the mess hall for breakfast. The women moved through their morning routine in anxious silence, wondering if yesterday's dinner had been some kind of anomaly, perhaps a special meal to process them into the camp. Surely the regular daily rations would be more in line with what they expected for prisoners. But when they entered the mess hall, the smells that greeted them were even more impossible than the night before. Staff Sergeant Martinez was already at his station, along with 2 other cooks who worked with efficient coordination. The serving line revealed a breakfast that made several women stop in their tracks. Scrambled eggs, fluffy and yellow with real eggs, not the powdered substitute they had grown used to in Germany. Thick slices of ham, pink and glistening. Toast with real butter and jam. Fresh milk. And coffee, actual coffee, not the ersatz chicory blend that had replaced real coffee in Germany years ago. The aroma alone was enough to make Elsa feel dizzy with disbelief. Rosa received her tray first again, and this time she didn't hesitate. She had spent the night convincing herself that dinner had been real, that it wasn't a dream or a trick. But seeing this breakfast, equally generous, equally impossible, brought back all her confusion. She sat down and stared at the ham. In Germany, meat for breakfast was a luxury from before the war, a memory of better times. Here, as prisoners, they were being served ham as if it were ordinary. Clara sat beside her and picked up a piece of toast. The bread was white, soft, nothing like the dense, dark bread they had eaten in Germany. She spread butter on it with trembling fingers, watching as it melted into the warm surface. When she bit into it, she closed her eyes. "This is what I remember from childhood," she whispered. Before everything changed. Gertrude was the one who finally broke. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will, maintaining her dignity and composure despite the confusion of the past 24 hours. But when she tasted the scrambled eggs, something inside her cracked. She set down her fork carefully, placed her hands flat on the table, and began to cry. Not quiet tears like the night before, but deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. "I thought it was Christmas," she managed to say between sobs. "I thought this was Christmas morning." Gertrude's breakdown at the breakfast table created a ripple effect through the mess hall. Several other women began crying as well, the emotional dam finally breaking after months of tension, fear, and carefully maintained composure. American soldiers looked on with uncomfortable uncertainty, unsure how to respond to this display of grief mixed with something that looked almost like gratitude. Captain Helen Patterson, the experienced female officer who commanded the facility, watched from the doorway. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen more than most. She had overseen male prisoner camps before, but this assignment was different. These women were not hardened soldiers. They were clerks and nurses and radio operators, many barely out of their teenage years, and they were clearly overwhelmed by treatment they had never expected to receive. Staff Sergeant Martinez approached the captain quietly. "Ma'am," he said in his slight Texas drawl, "I think they thought we were going to starve them." Captain Patterson nodded slowly. "The propaganda they were fed was probably quite effective, Sergeant. We're contradicting everything they were taught to believe about us." Martinez looked back at the crying women. "Maybe some of them could help in the kitchen. Give them something to do, something to focus on. Cooking is universal, ma'am. Doesn't matter what language you speak." The captain considered this. It was irregular, allowing prisoners to work in food preparation. But these were unusual circumstances, and regular approaches weren't working. "Make it voluntary," she finally said. "If any of them want to help, let them." The offer was extended through the translator that afternoon. Any prisoner who wished to assist in kitchen duties could volunteer. They would not be forced, and it would not affect their treatment either way. Elsa was the first to raise her hand. She had been thinking about the meals, about the care that went into their preparation, and she wanted to understand. She wanted to see for herself if this abundance was real or somehow manufactured just for their benefit. Rosa volunteered next, followed by Clara and 3 others. The next morning, the 6 German women reported to the kitchen and in Procedesider, hour before breakfast service. Martinez greeted them with a nod and handed each of them an apron. He didn't speak German and they spoke limited English, but he had been right about cooking being universal. He showed them where ingredients were stored, and their eyes widened at the sight. Sacks of flour and sugar, crates of fresh eggs, whole hams hanging in the cold storage, butter in quantities they hadn't seen in years. This wasn't a special supply for prisoners. This was simply what the camp had available. Martinez demonstrated how he wanted the eggs prepared, and Elsa stepped forward to help. Her hands moved automatically, cracking eggs into a large bowl, whisking them with milk and a pinch of salt. It was something her mother had taught her. The kitchen work became a daily routine for the 6 volunteers. Each morning, they arrived early to help prepare breakfast, and gradually their presence became a natural part of the kitchen's rhythm. Staff Sergeant Martinez proved to be a patient teacher, demonstrating techniques with his hands when words failed, nodding approval when they did something correctly. The language barrier slowly began to crumble, as simple food vocabulary became shared ground. Eggs, bread, butter, salt. These words needed no complex grammar, just repetition and context. Private Bobby Clark often stopped by the kitchen during his breaks, curious about the German women who had chosen to work alongside their captors. He was 20 years old, from a small town in Pennsylvania, and his natural friendliness gradually drew out shy smiles from the volunteers. Rosa discovered that Martinez prepared meals the way her grandmother had, with patience and attention to seasoning. She watched him carefully measure spices for the pork chops, noticed how he tested the doneness of meat with practiced fingers, saw the care he took to make sure the food was not just adequate but actually good. One morning, she gathered her courage and approached him with a soferent question in her halting English. "Why you cook so good for prisoners?" Martinez looked at her thoughtfully before answering. "My mother always said food is respect. You feed someone well, you show them they matter. Prisoner or not, you're still people." Rosa translated this for the other German volunteers, and they fell silent, absorbing the implications of his words. The turning point came in early December, when the kitchen staff prepared for a celebration. It was Private Clark's 21st birthday, and Martinez had decided to bake him a chocolate cake. Real chocolate, not the ersatz version the German women remembered from home. When Martinez brought out the ingredients, Elsa felt her breath catch in her throat. Chocolate, sugar, real butter, fresh eggs, all for a simple birthday celebration. In Germany, such ingredients would be impossible to find at any price. Here, they were being used to celebrate a young soldier's birthday, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Martinez noticed her expression and smiled slightly. "Want to help?" he asked. Elsa nodded, unable to speak. She helped mix the batter, the rich chocolate scent filling the kitchen and triggering memories of childhood birthdays before the war. When the cake came out of the oven, perfectly risen and fragrant, Martinez frosted it with chocolate icing and let the German volunteers help decorate it with simple designs. That afternoon, they carried the cake to the mess hall where Clark's unit had gathered to surprise him. The young soldier's face lit up with genuine joy, and his friends cheered. It was such an ordinary moment, such a normal celebration, and yet it shattered something inside the German women watching. After the celebration ended and the mess hall had cleared, 23-year-old Rosa Zimmerman sat at one of the empty tables, staring at the crumbs of chocolate cake that remained on a serving plate. Elsa sat beside her, waiting. Finally, Rosa spoke in German, her voice barely above a whisper but filled with anguish. "They told us Americans were starving. They told us their people were suffering, that their soldiers had no supplies, that we were winning." She looked at Elsa with tears in her eyes. "They lied to us about everything." The realization that spread through the German prisoners after the chocolate cake incident was profound and unsettling. If the Reich had lied about America's food situation, what else had been false? The women began questioning everything they had been told, every piece of propaganda they had accepted as truth. But their confusion was about to deepen even further. Captain Patterson called an assembly on November 22nd, gathering all 43 German prisoners in the main hall. Through the translator, she made an announcement that left the women stunned into silence. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, an important American holiday where we give thanks for our blessings and share a meal with others. We would like to invite you to join us for Thanksgiving dinner. You will eat the same food we eat, at tables alongside our staff. This is not required, but it is offered." The women looked at each other in confusion and disbelief. Invited to share a holiday meal? Not as servants or observers, but as guests? It seemed impossible. Another contradiction in a growing list of things that made no sense according to what they had been taught. That evening, the German women debated among themselves in their barracks. Some argued they should refuse, that accepting would somehow be a betrayal of their country or their captured comrades in other camps. Others, like Elsa, felt they had already crossed too many lines to pretend they could maintain pure opposition to their captors. "We have been eating their food for weeks," Elsa said quietly. "We have been working in their kitchen, helping prepare meals. What difference does it make if we sit at their tables for one meal?" Gertrude, who had broken down over breakfast weeks earlier, spoke with unusual firmness. "I want to understand them. I want to know who these people really are, not who we were told they were. I will go." In the end, all 43 women agreed to attend. The next day, November 23, 1944, they entered a mess hall that had been transformed. The usual efficient cafeteria setup had been replaced with longer tables arranged in a more communal style, decorated with autumn leaves and simple centerpieces. American soldiers and staff were already gathering, talking in animated voices about the holiday. When the German women entered, conversations paused briefly, but Captain Patterson gestured for them to take seats throughout the room, interspersed with the American personnel, rather than segregated at separate tables. Elsa found herself seated between Private Clark and a female nurse named Dorothy. Across from her sat Rosa and Staff Sergeant Martinez. The awkwardness was palpable at first, but it was broken when Martinez began bringing out the food. What appeared before them was beyond anything they had experienced so far. A whole roasted turkey, golden and enormous. Stuffing fragrant with sage and onions. Mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows, cranberry sauce, green beans, fresh rolls with butter. And then the pies, pumpkin and apple, served with real whipped cream. It was a feast that would have been extraordinary even in peacetime Germany, let alone for prisoners of war. Clara, seated near the end of one table, looked at the spread before her and whispered in German to Brigitte beside her, "How can they have all this? How is this possible?" But it wasn't just the food that overwhelmed them, it was being invited to share it. Private Clark passed the turkey platter to Elsa with a genuine smile. "First Thanksgiving?" he asked in simple English. She nodded, unable to find words. "It's about being grateful," he said, his boyish face earnest. Even in hard times, the Thanksgiving meal lingered in the minds of the German women long after the plates were cleared. That evening, back in their barracks, several of them retrieved paper and pencils they had been given for personal use. The International Red Cross facilitated mail between prisoners and their families, and the women were allowed to write letters home. But as Elsa sat on her cot with blank paper before her, she realized the impossibility of her task. How could she explain to her mother in Nuremberg what she was experiencing? How could she describe meals that seemed impossible? Kindness that contradicted everything they had been taught? She began writing several times, each attempt ending in frustration. "Dear Mama, I am safe and well treated. The Americans feed us adequately." But adequate was a lie. They fed her better than she had eaten in years. She tried again. "Dear Mama, you would not believe the abundance here." But that seemed cruel. Her mother was likely surviving on rations, struggling to find enough food. How could Elsa write about turkey and chocolate cake to a woman who might be going hungry? Around the barracks, other women struggled with the same dilemma. Rosa had started a letter to her sister in Heidelberg 3 times, crossing out each attempt. Clara simply sat staring at her blank paper, tears falling silently onto the page. Gertrude had written 2 paragraphs describing the Thanksgiving dinner before stopping abruptly and crumpling the paper. She couldn't send it. It would sound like propaganda, like she had been brainwashed or was trying to curry favor with the enemy. But the deeper problem wasn't just about food. It was about the growing realization that they had been systematically deceived. If Elsa wrote honestly to her mother, she would have to say, "The Americans are not monsters. They treat us with dignity. They feed us well. They invited us to their holiday table." And if those things were true, then what did it mean about the cause they had served? What did it mean about the war itself? That night, Brigitte voiced what many of them were thinking. If we tell them the truth about how we're treated, they'll think we've betrayed Germany. If we lie and say we're suffering, we perpetuate the same lies we were told." The women sat in silence, understanding the impossible position they occupied. They were prisoners who were being treated better than they had been as free women. They were enemies who were being shown unexpected kindness. They were Germans who were discovering that everything they had believed about America was false. Elsa finally wrote a simple letter. "Dear Mama, I am alive and safe. I am being treated fairly. I think of you constantly and pray you are well. I hope to see you again when this war finally ends. Your loving daughter Elsa." It was truthful without being detailed, loving without being revealing. She sealed it, knowing it said almost nothing of what she was really experiencing. Some truths, she realized, were too complicated to fit in a letter home. Winter turned to spring, and with it came news that changed everything. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. In prisoner camps across America, preparations began for repatriation. German soldiers would be returned to their defeated homeland, processed through displaced persons facilities, shaking slightly. "May I ask you something that is very difficult?" Patterson looked at the young German, a woman who had become one of the most reliable kitchen volunteers. "Of course, Elsa." "What is it?" Elsa took a deep breath. "Is it possible for some of us to stay?" Captain Patterson's face registered surprise at Elsa's question, but not shock. She had seen the transformation in these women over the months, had watched them integrate into the camp's daily life in ways that transcended normal prisoner-captor relationships. "That's a complicated request," the captain said carefully. "But tell me why you're asking," Elsa explained haltingly, choosing her words with care. She spoke of the lies they had been told, the reality they had discovered, the impossible choice between returning to devastation or staying in a place where they had found unexpected dignity. "We were taught you were monsters," Elsa said quietly. "Instead, you fed us like family." Over the following days, Captain Patterson consulted with her superiors. The request was unprecedented, but the times were unprecedented as, well, Europe was flooded with displaced persons, and Germany itself was barely functioning. Eventually, a compromise emerged. Those who wished to return would be repatriated as planned. Those who wished to stay could apply for displaced person status and eventual immigration sponsorship, though they would need American families or organizations willing to vouch for them. Of the 43 women, 17 chose to stay. Elsa was among them, as were Rosa, Clara, and Gertrude. The process was long and complicated, but members of the local community who had heard their story stepped forward. The Henderson family, who had visited the camp through a church program, offered to sponsor Elsa. Dr. Margaret Walsh, who had worked with Clara, arranged for her continued medical training. Staff Sergeant Martinez himself vouched for Rosa, helping her find work in a restaurant kitchen. 25 years later, in 1970, Elsa Kohler Henderson stood in her kitchen in suburban Philadelphia, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for her American husband and their 3 children. On the counter sat a recipe card in her own handwriting, pork chops with applesauce and sweet potatoes. It was the meal that had changed her life, and she made it every year on the anniversary of her arrival in America. Her daughter, 16-year-old Margaret, watched her mother glaze this and released to whatever remained of their former lives. At Camp Rosewood, the announcement came on May 15th. Captain Patterson gathered all 43 women in the main hall, her face serious but not unkind. "Ladies," she said through the translator, "I have received official orders regarding your repatriation to Germany. Transportation will be arranged within the next 3 weeks. You will be processed and released to return to your homes." The words should have brought relief, freedom, the end of captivity, a return to their homeland and families. But instead, the women sat in complicated silence. 6 months had passed since their arrival. 6 months of meals that defied everything they had been taught. 6 months of unexpected kindness from people they had been told were their enemies. 6 months of working alongside American soldiers who treated them not as defeated foes but as human beings worthy of dignity. And now they were being told they could leave. Return to a Germany they had learned was devastated, destroyed, occupied by foreign powers, return to cities that lay in ruins, to families who might be dead or scattered, return to a country that had systematically lied to them about the nature of their enemies and the justness of their cause. Elsa lay awake that night, wrestling with thoughts she could barely admit to herself. In the bunk beside her, Rosa was clearly awake as well. Finally, Rosa whispered in German, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Elsa didn't need to ask for clarification. "Yes," she whispered back. "What kind of life waits for us there?" Rosa continued, her voice barely audible. "We were captured. We worked with Americans. We ate at their tables. Some will see us as traitors already. And what will we eat? What will we do in a country that's been bombed into rubble?" The questions hung in the darkness like forbidden prayers. Over the next few days, quiet conversations spread through the barracks. Not all the women felt the same way. Some were desperate to return, to search for family members, to rebuild their lives in their homeland, no matter how difficult. But others, like Elsa and Rosa, found themselves contemplating something that would have seemed unthinkable 6 months earlier. On May 20th, Elsa approached Captain Patterson during the afternoon work period. Her English had improved dramatically over the months, and she no longer needed the translator for simple conversations. "Captain," she said, her voice sweet potatoes with butter. "Mom," she asked, "why do you always make this specific meal on this day?" Elsa set down the butter dish and looked at her daughter, this child who had never known war or hunger or propaganda. How could she explain that a simple Tuesday dinner had shattered an entire worldview? "Because," Elsa said quietly, "this meal taught me that everything I had been told was a lie. The Americans were supposed to be starving, cruel, and hateful. Instead, they fed me better than I had ever been fed, and treated me with more kindness than I deserved." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "They told us America was our enemy. What they didn't tell us was that America could also become our home." The pork chops sizzled in the pan, filling the kitchen with the same aroma that had greeted a terrified 21-year-old German prisoner on a cold November evening 25 years before. Some meals, Elsa had learned, change more than your hunger. They change your entire life.